There are four faces carved into the side of American history at Mount Rushmore. But today I'm carving my own into boxing. This isn't about who critics say is the best. This isn't about numbers on BoxRec. This is about my Mount Rushmore. The fighters whose styles I studied, whose moves I stole, and whose fights taught me the game. Four legends, four warriors, four men who defined what boxing means to me. This is my personal boxing Mount Rushmore, and by the end of this video, you'll understand why these four fighters aren't just champions, they're teachers. First up, we've got Marvelous Marvin Hagler. And yes, he legally changed his name to Marvelous because he felt he wasn't getting his respect. And that tells you a lot about his mentality. Marvelous Marvin Hagler accomplished almost everything there is to accomplish in boxing. If we look at his accolades, we see he was an undisputed middleweight champion from 1980 to 1987. He had 12 successful title defences of his undisputed title and is a Ring Magazine and Boxing Hall of Fame inductee. If you watch Marvin Hagler, you know he's one of the best switch hitters in history. Equally comfortable, southpaw or orthodox, which goes to show how high of a boxing IQ he must have, because we've seen a number of times in his fights where he might start off orthodox, and then if a guy's maybe giving him some problems, or if Marvin Hagler even just feels like it's time to give a different look, he can just switch to southpaw and completely throw off his opponent. This is something that very few boxers are able to do, but Marvin Hagler mastered it. He balanced aggression with defense and an incredible chin with stamina. And he's famous for his willingness to fight fire with fire. If you know Marvin Hagler, you know he was one of those few boxers throughout history who never ducked the smoke. We look at his resume, he's got notable wins over Roberto Duran, Thomas Hearns in a legendary 3-round war, John Mugabe and Alan Minter. Of course, his career ended with a controversial split decision loss to Sugar Ray Leonard in 1987, in a fight that for a long time was one of my favourite fights to watch just because it was such a chess match. You see the fight start off and Marvin Hagler is fighting, I believe, southpaw. And it's sort of seen as this is a bit of a bad decision for Marvin Hagler because Ray Leonard is just getting to him and just landing on him. You know, Ray Leonard had his hands were just so quick, had so much speed in those hands. It makes him a problem against anyone of any generation, ultimately. He's one of those few fighters that truly transcended generations. And, you know, there'll be some people that would have had Ray Leonard on their Mount Rushmore. Unfortunately, I've got Marvin Hagler, that's personal preference, but if Ray Leonard was on yours, you know, there's no shame in that at all. Like I said, it was a controversial split decision loss for Marvin Hagler there, a fight that he truly believed he won. At first, I thought maybe he won, but overall, I do think Ray Leonard got the best of him for that 12 rounds. Nonetheless, that led to Marvin Hagler retiring and saying he sort of fell out of love with the sport, and Ray Leonard sort of ducked him, and that was it for him. Again, really speaks to his mentality and how much of a boxing purist he was. And like I said, what I love about Marvin Hagler is how he showed you could truly be dangerous from both stances. He wasn't switching for flash or for highlight reels. He was switching because it gave him the advantage. When I watch Hagler, I see someone who's mastered the fundamentals so much. He's mastered the fundamentals so much that he can apply them no matter what stance he is in. Truly making Marvin Hagler a one-of-a-kind boxer and well deserving of a place on my Mount Rushmore. Next up is Vasiliy Lomachenko, the Matrix. A fighter who made people rethink what footwork and angles could look like in boxing. You look at his accolades, again another boxer who accomplished almost everything there is to accomplish in boxing. A 2-time Olympic gold medalist, a 3-division world champion, winning world titles at featherweight, super featherweight and lightweight, and is the fastest boxer to win a world title and done it in his 3rd pro fight. Again, you look at his style, you see footwork, pivots and angles, and he made his opponents look like children in there. He was a high volume puncher with surgical accuracy and another fighter similar to Marvin Hagler who could switch stances mid-combination. An incredible resume, noting wins over Gary Russell Jr., Nicholas Walters, legend Guillermo Rigondeaux and world champion Jorge Linares. We even saw Lomachenko in an effort to constantly always be fighting the top level opponents in boxing. He would fight Teofimo Lopez and Devin Haney, both guys who no longer even fight at lightweight, right? Lomachenko was a guy who was moving up to lightweight. These guys no longer even make lightweight. Teofimo Lopez fights at 140. Devin Haney now fights at 147. And against Devin Haney, who is a 147-pound fighter now, it was a close fight that many people think Lomachenko won. I think Devin Haney he used his physical advantages well against Lomachenko, and I think Devin Haney did edge the victory. And almost similar against Teofimo Lopez as well, where Lomachenko really just didn't start the fight well at all, and Teofimo just picked up those early rounds. And even when Lomachenko was getting back into the fight on the back end, it wasn't enough, and Teofimo Lopez had already won all the rounds. Not all the rounds, but won enough rounds to win that fight, right? But again, two guys who, in their own rights, were world champions. You know, world champions in their own right, undefeated at the time. I don't think Teofimo Lopez was, but Devin Haney was undefeated at the time and still undefeated now. World champions, no shame in losing to those guys. Again, they're so much bigger than Lomachenko. And like I said, what stands out for me about Lomachenko is how much he influenced an entire generation of boxing and boxers. You'll see a lot of these young guys now trying the Matrix style, the pivots, the angles. That's all Lomachenko's impact. And like I said, even when he lost, like against Teofimo Lopez, he showed a ton of resolve, and he's undersized at 135, but was consistently still chasing the best fights. And then we've got Canelo, the last of a dying breed in a lot of ways. A 4-weight world champion, winning world titles at 154 pounds, 160 pounds, 168 pounds, and 175 pounds. Becoming the first undisputed super middleweight champion in history, and a multiple-time pound-for-pound #1 ranked fighter. He's now since gone on to become a 2 times undisputed super middleweight champion. But if you know Canelo, if you're familiar with his style of boxing, you know he's got incredible head movement and upper body defense in the pocket. Almost, you've not seen it really before. At a rate like this, where Canelo was so brazen with it, so willing to stand in the pocket, and you just cannot land on him. You see other guys that were defensive masters like a Pernell Whitaker, who similarly did have really good upper body movement, but a Floyd who mixed up his defense a lot. Of course, he had great head movement. He used a Philly shell to defend his body and had really good fundamental footwork too. Canelo's defense is a lot more upper body based, right? He's a heavy counter puncher with knockout power in both hands. His style is patient, economical, and methodical. He's got a number of notable wins, such as going 36 rounds with Gennady Golovkin. There is not a man in boxing history that I believe, other than Canelo, that could have gone 36 rounds with Triple G. That's how highly I rate Triple G. That's how highly I rate Canelo. He's got wins over Miguel Cotto, Shane Mosley, Callum Smith, Billy Joe Saunders, and Caleb Plant. Not to forget beating a legend at light heavyweight for a world championship in Sergey Kovalev. Of course, he has got some losses on his record. And again, there's no shame in that. Some of the best boxers ever have lost. They're on this list too. Canelo's lost to Floyd Mayweather at 23. And being honest, I rewatched that fight again recently, and Floyd really just outclassed Canelo, if I'm being honest. The way Floyd was able to just shoot that jab to the head, to the body, the feints, it was a masterclass. Canelo was only 23, but I don't like that as an excuse, because Canelo at that point was still as undefeated 2-belt world champion at 154 pounds. You know, he's not a kid. He was young, but he's not a kid, right? And Floyd outclassed him, but Floyd was a 6-weight world champion, pound-for-pound legend, a guy who never lost. You know, I could go on and on about Floyd Mayweather. Everyone knows he's one of the best of all time. Again, no shame in losing to Floyd Mayweather. And of course, did lose to Dimitri Bivol at 175 pounds. Now, the Dimitri Bivol fight was an interesting one, where we saw Dimitri Bivol just really outwork Canelo. And there's not been many guys that have been able to do that and succeed, right? There's been a number of guys that have tried to outbox Canelo, but throughout the duration of the fight, Canelo would land on them, and his punches are heavy. He's heavy-handed, got a lot of power in both hands, like I mentioned earlier. And, you know, sooner or later, you can't keep taking those shots. The shots that you're able to take in round 2, you can't take in round 7 and round 8 from Canelo. Because Canelo's power is lasting all 12 rounds in those fights. But Dimitri Bivol was able to use his footwork, was able to use his physicality and use his combinations to pretty much just keep Canelo on the back foot the entire fight. And even when they would meet in the middle, Dimitri Bivol's ghost steps and his traditional Soviet footwork, it just made him too tough of an opponent to pin down, and Canelo wasn't going to be able to land those big shots that he needed to ultimately win that fight. But again, Dimitri Bivol's a guy who's much bigger than Canelo. But what I really love about Canelo is how he doesn't have to be the biggest guy in the division to win. At 175, at 168 pounds, but he's not towering over anybody. But he found ways to become the champion. The head movement in the pocket, like I said, man, it's something I've tried to learn myself. And what Canelo has achieved in the sport of boxing in terms of being a 4-weight world champion is something that takes serious balls. And chasing those big fights and fighting a lot of those big names at 160, 168 and 175 pounds is something that we rarely see anymore in boxing. And that's why Canelo is more than deserving of being in my Mount Rushmore. Last, but by definitely not any means least, Bernard Hopkins, the executioner and later the alien. Bernard Hopkins is one of the longest reigning middleweight champions in history with 20 title defences from 1995 to 2005. He was the first fighter to ever unify all 4 major middleweight belts and would even become light heavyweight champion at 46 and 49 years old. One of the oldest world champions ever. Now, what made Bernard Hopkins so special? It was his style. It was his master of fundamentals, discipline and ring IQ. He mastered the jab, timing and controlling of distance. He was dirty when he had to be, but one thing about Bernard Hopkins that I loved is that he was always in control. Notable wins over the likes of Felix Trinidad, Oscar De La Hoya, Antonio Tarver, Kelly Pavlik and Jean Pascal. He fought until he was nearly 52 years old. Now, you're only able to do that if you're a smart boxer, a disciplined boxer, and you don't take damage. That's the only way you can fight at 52 and still be fighting at a really high level for a 52-year-old. The only way you can do it is that. So, even though Bernard Hopkins showed a ton of discipline, it's not just a word, it's a career. It's a lifestyle for Bernard Hopkins. And this man started his career with a loss. He came out of prison and built himself into one of the smartest fighters ever. And he proved, let this be a lesson to all the young boxers out there, all the boxing fans, all the people that study boxing, that a really good jab can take you round the world. Bernard Hopkins wasn't a huge power puncher. He had some speed, but he had tremendous fundamentals, tremendous boxing IQ, and he had a snappy jab that was like a Swiss Army knife in a toolkit. He had a jab that could, be a defensive jab. He had a scoop jab. He had a power jab. He could shoot it to the head, shoot it to the body. It could set up other things. He could use it as something to distract you while he moves. It was a multifaceted jab that was able to truly take him around the world. And again, like I said, let that be a lesson to all the young boxing fans out there, or all the young boxers out there that are watching boxing and trying to learn the game. You watch the likes of Bernard Hopkins. Honestly, you watch the likes of all these guys on this list if you're a student of the game. If you're a student of the game, you see all guys like this. And I've really enjoyed this video, actually, because it's allowed me to look back on a lot of my favourite boxers. And Bernard Hopkins, without a shadow of a doubt, is in that conversation. The discipline we saw against Roy Jones Jr. in that second fight, where you could see Roy Jones Jr., who was still in tremendous shape, his body still looked amazing, but Bernard Hopkins was able to just work out those chinks in Roy Jones's game, knew the punches Roy Jones wanted to throw, knew what Roy Jones was trying to do, and didn't allow him to do it. And before you know it, it's 12 rounds in and the fight's over, and Bernard Hopkins has just won another unanimous decision victory, right? So Bernard Hopkins, one of the most impressive boxers, in my opinion, purely due to his fundamentals, his IQ, and his ability, his staying power. To become a world champion in 1995 and still be boxing into the 2010s is crazy. It's crazy, but crazy boxers do crazy things, and Bernard Hopkins is one of the best ever to do it, and that's why he's on my Mount Rushmore. So that's my Mount Rushmore. Marvin Hagler, Vasiliy Lomachenko, Canelo Álvarez and Bernard Hopkins. Not the 4 most accomplished ever, not the 4 greatest of all time, but the 4 that shaped how I see boxing and how I study it. Now, I know all of you are going to have your own Mount Rushmores, and that's cool. I want to see them in the comments below, and I want to see who shaped you the most. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Leave a like, show me your Mount Rushmores in the comments, and subscribe. Another video from Seth, and I'm out.